guys. So it's been 2 years since I last uploaded my video. For some reason it has gotten a lot of traction recently, so I thought I would make another update and answer some of the questions you have. Needless to say, a lot has happened since then. I personally am no longer in China. I actually moved apartment 6 times. 4 of those were in China, 2 of them were outside of China. Also got locked down during the COVID lockdown period in Shanghai. Since then, China has also entered a recession, so the sentiments about moving to China or working in China might be a little bit different than when I had filmed that before. But I wanted to answer some of the questions that you guys had because I saw that people were leaving all these really amazing comments. So the first question that a lot of people asked was, how did I find my job in China? Everyone's situation is different, and my situation is just a reference point. It's not a general statement whatsoever. I want to give you guys a little bit of background about like my Chinese level. So I grew up in China in Guangzhou, and then I moved to Canada when I was 10 years old with my mom, and I lived there for about 5 years. I became fluent in English. I started thinking in English, and then when I was 15 I went back to China for international school, but it was also very much in English, and all my friends were American and we had like a very Americanized education. Also, I went to university in Canada. So before I moved back to China, English was definitely my first language, and I had conversational Chinese, but I didn't have professional level Chinese. I couldn't really write, like I knew how to type, but I had a lot of 错别, which is you select the wrong character when you type, and also I didn't know a lot of professional vocabulary you should use, how you should write an email in Chinese. I didn't know any of those. So how I found my job opportunity was I was headhunted by a recruiter on LinkedIn. So I worked for ByteDance, and ByteDance at the time, even now, they are still heavily trying to recruit overseas talent because a lot of their products, like TikTok, is based overseas. The next question that a lot of people ask is, how can you find a job in China? And I think that is such a personalized question. So I made this picture that I'll put up here that you can see. I'll also link it in the bio so that you can click into it and get like a full definition version. But I will say that it really depends on your Chinese proficiency level and also what function you're trying to work for. So if you're an engineer, if you work as a business analyst, or if you have like a very specific skill set, it's kind of like saying like, hey, I want to move to Europe, what kind of jobs can I get, or like how will I find a job? Like it does depend on what kind of jobs are you good to work for. But I would say that in general, Chinese companies can actually really vary in terms of work culture. Like on one hand, you have like the full-on local Chinese companies. Those are typically like the state-owned enterprises or companies that are similar to how your parents or grandparents' generation has worked and communicated. So they're very relationship based. You need to know how to network and use soft persuasion skills, think in a very Chinese way. You also need to know like Chinese dinner and drinking etiquettes. That's a really important part of doing business in China. So that could be very challenging for people who don't have Chinese working experience or like grow up in Chinese culture or know Chinese. On the other hand, you have like very Western working cultures, and that's typically in like a multinational corporation. So for example, at L'Oreal Shanghai or Lululemon Shanghai. The recent cases is there's a lot of Chinese tech companies who have embraced this Western working philosophy because they want to be more collaborative, they want to be more flat, and also they have key products that are based overseas. So Shein would be a good example, or Pinduoduo with Temu or TikTok. So they really also want to embrace the Western working culture. So those I find that people with more Western working experience will tend to gravitate towards and will fit in better. And then lastly, I think a really good path is just working for nonprofits or non-Chinese employers. So I have a lot of friends who came to China and started working as English teachers. That's a really common path, and I've met a lot of friends in Beijing and Shanghai who've done that, and they've found a lot of community doing that. So I would say that's also another path, but it really does depend on your situation as well. And then so the other questions around the visa situation, and there are two types of permits that you can get. So if you want to enter China and you are not Chinese, then you would need either a visa or a permit. So the difference between that is that a visa, you can see of it more like an ability for you to visit the country. A permit is more so for you to live in the country. And if you have a permit, then you can actually start paying for social insurance and start accruing some of your pension and things like that. So if you plan to have income there, I would suggest you have a permit. But if you're only just visiting your family, visiting your relatives, or going for tourist purposes, then a visa would be much better. So when I went to China, I applied for a working permit, and it was applied by my employer. So all I had to do was submit my documents to my employer, and then they applied on my behalf. But after that, I jumped employers a few times, so I actually had to apply for my own working permit, so I understood the process a little bit more. The caveat here is that your permit is tied to your employer. So anytime that your employer terminates a contract or you decide to jump employers, you will have to cancel that permit and then apply for a temporary stay visa of 30 days. And then within that 30 days, you have to essentially line up another contract, like a labor contract, so that you could apply for another permit. If not, and that window of time expires, then you can no longer be inside China unless you apply for an extension or apply for like a tourist visa or something. But because at the time that I was there, it was during COVID, so China didn't actually approve of any tourist visa, so you had to be there on a permit. It was like a very tricky situation, and then I had to switch employers, and in between those I had to wait 2 months so that I could cancel one and apply for another and wait for the other one to get approved. So just be aware of that essentially you're in China hosted by a specific company. Another question that people are very, very curious about, and I don't blame you, is the income and expenses situation. So I will give you guys a rough breakdown, but do keep in mind this is my own personal experience, but I will try to make some overarching averages and generalizations so you have a rough idea. So I would say like the average salary for a Chinese student, like fresh out of college and then working at a tech company, is around like 2 to 3K USD per month. For me, because I was an expat, also I had some working experience, I averaged about 5 to 8K per month, and it depended on the job that I had. And a lot of that initial pay gets reduced because of China's taxation and their mandatory social and life insurance called 五险一金. So because of that, the take home that I would get after taxes and mandatory insurance is about 5 to 6K. And then after that, the biggest bulk of my expenses obviously goes to rent. So rent is really interesting. I find that to be super interesting in China. So in first tier cities like Beijing and Shanghai, it could get a little bit expensive. So that's why most people choose to have a roommate. So there's a couple of living situations you can have. The first type is co-living, which is the one I chose. So that's around 400 to 500 per month. So for me, I lived with a friend, and then after that, I used a platform called Ziru to find roommates. It's a really good solution for most young people in China. You essentially rent from the platform sources these apartments from landlords and they redecorate it. So everything looks very standardized, and then they split these apartments into rooms of 3 to 4, and some have in-room bathrooms, others are shared bathrooms. But because everyone who uses the platform are similar in age to like me and work in a similar job I have, like we all tend to get along very well. I also thought it was a really good understanding of like just how a local Chinese person thinks and works and lives. So I took that as an opportunity to kind of just like learn and get acquainted. You can also live on your own. That's like another type of living situation. So that would usually come out to about like 1.5K to 2K a month. So, like if you're fresh out of grad and a local Chinese student and you make 2K, then essentially all your money is gone. If you do want to use the on your own option, you can use a platform like Beike. That's really helpful for finding these apartments, and you usually rent directly from the landlord. After rent, the other source would be food and entertainment. So when I first joined ByteDance, even now I think they still have all of their own breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks. So everything you can get there is free. They also have their own gym and stuff. So I didn't have a lot of expenditures. On the weekends, I would get like maybe a massage here and there, eat out with friends, go for workouts. I would spend about $200 per month on meals and entertainment. And then lastly, clothing and shopping. I'm a girl, I like to buy things, and I buy things on Taobao a lot. So I would spend another $200 to $300 per month on shopping. But overall, you could actually save quite a lot, especially if you do the co-living option for rent. And I would say overall, the environment in China is like super lively and vibrant. You can literally buy anything you want to buy online. You can get anything delivered. Everything comes super fast. Like the restaurants and dining options are like super innovative now. So there's a lot of really cool options to try and have fun. And then the last question I want to answer is, a lot of people ask about what I thought about the pros and cons of 996. And this is a really interesting topic because I have a lot to say about this. I don't know if I can fit all this in one video. If not, I will do a part 2. I will say that after I came to China and after I posted that, China actually banned the 996 culture. The government has some soft policies where they told the internet companies like, hey, if you continue having these 996 policies, it's against labor laws, and therefore we will have to crack down on you. And a lot of them reverted these. So Tencent, ByteDance, Alibaba, they all told their employees like, don't come in anymore on the weekends. So ByteDance used to have this rule where they would make you work on Sundays every other week, and on Sundays you actually get paid like 1.5 times more than your average day. So you could not come in, but if you do come in, you like make a sizable portion of your income through that Sunday. But because China's government didn't want to encourage this kind of like intense competition, they canceled it. However, that has some nuances in terms of whether or not people thought that was good. Like you would think immediately people are like, amazing, like we don't have to work that much anymore. But actually a lot of people found that to be not a friendly policy because people had these really big mortgages that they took out, and a lot of the payments that they had to make to meet their mortgage depended on them working that overtime on the weekends. So people were like, what about my mortgage? Also, like it doesn't mean that your workload gets reduced because you work in 2 extra less days. Like maybe your leader still has the same expectation for you in terms of output. It's just now you actually like you don't get paid for it and you still have to do the work. So I wouldn't say like take that policy at face value. So the main advantage I thought was that it was like a super fast learning opportunity. It felt like baptism by the fire. Like when you join Chinese tech company, the time that I joined, there were just like too many things to do and not enough people. So people are always willing to give you more scope. Compared to in Canada, I really felt like I had to earn my place. Like everywhere I looked, employers are like, okay, so you want to do this new role, like do you have prior experience? And it's like, no, I don't. That's why I want to do this new role. So it's like a vicious cycle where if you don't have the experience, you can't do it. But if you don't do it, then you don't get experience. In China, everyone's willing to give you an opportunity. So if you're willing to work hard and if you're like, if you can do it on the first try, then I think you could go really far. It's also very entrepreneurial. I think people are less bureaucratic. They don't care about the process as much as they care about the results. Like they just want to get this done. They want to make sure that this app grows by 200%. I worked at a US tech company as well. You do have to check a lot of boxes. But it's definitely less like that in China. I think the third thing is just it's very okay to be yourself. There's something about working in China and being Chinese, like I feel just very comfortable being myself. I feel like I didn't have to hide or try to adapt as new hobbies so that my coworkers will like me more. I also didn't have to put on makeup. No one put on makeup in China. Everyone just kind of like wears a hoodie and goes to work. So I just felt like there were like less cultural clashes, and because all the senior managers were Chinese, like you didn't feel like there was a bamboo ceiling of any kind. And then the last thing that I really loved was just there were so many incredibly smart people, and I think I met the most thoughtful, intelligent people when I was in China, and especially in Beijing. Like, I think people there are so eager to learn about how the world works, how America functions. Like, they constantly study America, they constantly look at American news. And I think because I was a part of that, they were willing to have me, you know, like lead calls with American investors, like prominent VCs and people that you'll see on the news. And I just found that to be really fascinating. All of that were super great things. I'll talk a little bit about the downsides. So the first downside is definitely that it's not sustainable, you know, physically or mentally. I think it's great for a short burst of time just for learning, but I saw team leaders who were female who literally, you know, gave birth, and then 5 hours later they're in the meeting like trying to lead a project, just because like the business moves so fast. So if you're gone for a week, a month, like everything changes, like, and they need people to be there all the time so you could get easily replaced. Also, I think there's a philosophical question of, if there's no growth, why are we working so hard? I think when I first joined, it was still like your APP, like daily average user, could double every year. So because of that, people were like, oh, everything we do, there's results, so therefore it's worth it. But since these last 2 years, it's just been really like a lot of the sectors have started involuting, which is a word that they created. It's called 内卷, but it's basically when there's no growth, but you keep working so hard, and so instead of rolling forward, you start rolling within yourself. So yeah, the growth has slowed down, but the work pace continues. So it kind of, for me, I thought like, what's the point? And then lastly, a point on efficiency. It's definitely not as efficient as North America. Because of the long hours, people are kind of just used to like working at a slower pace, like less intensity, unless there's like a massive project due, and then it's like work. People are less like, okay, here's the agenda, let's talk about these things, bam. So an anecdotal evidence is like people book 30-minute meetings in North America, and people expect meetings to be like very well thought out. I think in China, a lot of times the standard meeting time is an hour, and a lot of it's just brainstorming, and so a lot of times people don't come with a lot of agenda. So it's like hard to direct the conversation. And I think a lot of times people bring supporting members on their team to the meeting. So there's a lot of like adjacent people in the meeting, and that they don't speak, but they need to be there for context. So people tend to be stuck with like a lot of meetings during the day, and then after, you know, like 4 or 5, when the meetings die down, then they have to actually catch up on their work. So I wouldn't say that's like a really productive way of working, but because you needed information to spread so horizontally and you needed to keep everyone informed, people just had to have a lot of meetings. I had coworkers who literally had like 2 earphones in their ear, and they had like one meeting in one and another meeting in another, so that they could like double meet and be informed in both. It was crazy to me, but yeah, they work so hard. That's a little bit about my experience. Leave me any comments you have. Love to answer any questions. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and see you next time.